Mental health has been one of the premier struggles that I've had symptomatically for Lyme, and because it presents itself as its own type of disease, it is harder for doctors to associate that with Lyme disease. And a lot of times, just having something like that will not get you a proper diagnosis. They'll lead you more towards, different therapies and different medications and things like that. And so as you said, I've been struggling with Lyme for about 10 years. And one of the first issues that came up were repeated strep infections. And right after one of those infections, I had this kind of bout of OCD tick-like symptoms where I had to repeatedly touch things multiple times, and I was only 10 or 11 at the time, so I didn't really understand what was going on, but my parents noticed it as obviously something abnormal. And so I was able to, what they did was they got me tested for OCD, and they were like, yeah, the doctor said I had a little bit of it, but not to worry too much about it, and eventually it went away. But every few years it kept manifesting itself in a different form. And so I would have these kind of intrusive thought patterns that would come in where I was unable to stop thinking about something. And it was usually something bad that you normally don't want to think about, and it would just never leave my head. And so for about 3 years through middle school and early high school, I went through this period where every 15 minutes, one of my recurring thoughts would come into my head, and I would spend 10 minutes kind of deliberating over it, and then would kind of get that 5 minutes of peace before another thought would pop into my head again. And so I did all kinds of therapies for this, and tried a few different medications, and nothing really seemed to work. It just kind of came and went as it pleased. And so when I got most recently, the most sick was in 2017, the year before I got diagnosed. And I got this awful social anxiety where I was taking the back ways to classes at school and not wanting to go into the dining halls or be around a lot of people. And I started to have a lot of insomnia and nighttime panic attacks. And this was kind of brought on along with the other symptoms that I had been having, but there was no doctor who was able to kind of connect the dots that all of these were shown to Lyme. And so it was quite a struggle for a little while, and they eventually kind of give you this diagnosis of treatment-resistant depression. And I just think that is something that's really frustrating for a lot of people, and I know a lot of people have dealt with and continue to deal with when you've tried different therapies and medications and different doctors and nothing seems to work. And so I just think it's important to recognize that Lyme disease can cause these psychiatric manifestations, and making sure that you at least check that off your list as you move forward towards working for whatever diagnosis that you have. Yeah, I was very fortunate that my parents were very insistent that I saw different therapists and different counselors, and making sure that I found one that I was personally comfortable with, because that's obviously a really big part about going to therapy. Is if you're in therapy and you're not comfortable with the practitioner that you're working with, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress. And so after finding the right therapist, whether it was while I was at college or before when I was home here in central New York, that was super important. And I just felt that by telling these practitioners my thoughts and my story, and them validating that there was some kind of problem, was really helpful for me. It was frustrating to still not see and to be categorized as having depression and having anxiety and OCD and panic attacks and things like that, without a real answer as to why that was happening. So I really thought that one of my favorite things to also do was find TV shows that were more on the mellow side and kind of calming, and just watching those. If I was having a really hard day with like intrusive thought patterns and things like that, they seem to break it up and just be able to take my mind away from that and onto something else. Yeah, I definitely had doctors that said that. I had a lot of, one of my other big symptoms for Lyme is really extreme fatigue issues. And I was an athlete. I did all kinds of sports and clubs and things like that. And so a lot of times doctors would pass it off as either, it's just normal, fatigue. That's how you're supposed to feel. You're growing, all of those things. Or when I would have kind of another cycle of some kind of mental health symptom, they would attribute it to, well, of course you're tired, you're having these thoughts come up so often, and you're having to work really hard to go through them. That's obviously going to make you very mentally fatigued. And I think for a long time I took that diagnosis as true and saying, okay, that's what they're telling me, that's what this must be. And it was nice to get an answer, if you could call it that, but it didn't help in that still no therapy, no medication, nothing was helping to relieve any of those symptoms. And so it was still this ever-present battle. And I think once I started seeing that happening, I started to really recognize that there must be something else going on that, we haven't looked at yet, that hasn't come to the surface, and holding on to that hope that something else was really going on. And doing my own research, I think, was really therapeutic to be able to see what kinds of diseases and conditions can cause the type of mental health symptoms that I was having. And, I ended up getting diagnosed because a friend told me, hey, maybe you should look at this. And so that's why I think that learning about the mental health symptoms of Lyme can be really beneficial for people who are still searching for that one diagnosis. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that I'm always positive about it. I definitely have those moments where everything's just very overwhelming and you kind of hit a wall and, not super positive about it, not seeing kind of that light at the end of the tunnel or whatever it is. And that's frustrating. But my go-to when that happens is just, that fake it till you make it kind of attitude of being positive even when nothing seems positive, and just trying to find, even if it's not in my health, but in anything else in my life, something that's positive that I can hold on to until something with my health does become positive again, and kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop in that sense. And I also just love connecting with people who have Lyme or similar stories that I have, and just understanding their stories really helps me feel validated in what I'm feeling. And so that's why I love to hear from other people and try to connect with the Lyme community and stuff like that, because it really is kind of a therapeutic thing for me as well. I think my one piece of advice would be to never give up on what you feel you deserve. So if you still think that something else is wrong and there's just something gnawing at you, keep going after those thoughts, keep going after those diagnoses. Try to, obviously it's really expensive to do all these tests and things like that. Try to do your own research as much as you can so that you can, limit the amount of things that you have to be testing for. And, don't take one doctor's opinion as indisputable fact, because there's, especially with Lyme, a lot of different opinions, and it's important to find a doctor who trusts you, who believes in you, is not going to tell you that things are in your head. I think that's one of the most important things. And so, and to have hope, because the fact of the matter is I was diagnosed in October of 2018, And I started my medications shortly after that. And within, I would say, late November, early December, 80% of my psychiatric symptoms were gone. So there is hope in that sense of once you find the right diagnosis, the right medication, like things can really turn around. And it doesn't have to be, no matter what your brain is trying to tell you, it doesn't have to be like that forever. So to never give up on what you believe and to have hope would probably be my two biggest pieces of advice.